No worries. So,
Hello, everyone. So sorry for being late. Some technical difficulties on my side, but glad to be here and glad to welcome a first of all the supplier, then a boss, um, and now a good friend, Juergen Mueller. Juergen, good to see you again. Uh, so yeah, long time no seeing in person,
yeah,
but welcome.
we go a long way back. I was actually thinking how long we go back. It's like you say, it's like we 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 bumped into each other a lot, and finally, in the end, we became colleagues. Like I said, sitting on the same team and actually going the same day. But actually, when I actually was looking back and what the history was, I mean, we had also a history at the university where we, together with Nina, did some research together in Pretoria. So, and yeah, actually,
And the
quite good fun.
GSSC project, don't forget that.
Yeah, the provincial project there with Microsoft was also quite good fun in a way, where yeah, actually a lot of new ways of actually setting the world of IT back together in a way, and approaching it in new ways. Not in new ways, but in good ways actually. And actually starting from scratch, there was an opportunity. I remember that we started from scratch and could do things without bringing legacy and history with. That was that project where we spoke about. I mean, clean slate, like we say. And actually, I remember we put some really good things together there. I haven't heard lately about how it's running, but I mean, I assume the
So
basic was right. I mean, and
Again,
actually,
I say to people that in that specific project, yes, it was a clean slate, but we all brought our bad habits with.
true, true, and
And I
um,
think that's human. I mean, you can't but do that, yeah.
I
Um,
never forget that there were a mistake can be made very easily. It's just there, and before you know, you have it, and you have to live with it for a long time. I mean, for me it was pretty easy, or not easy, but I mean, we could start from a blank page and make the designs as it was. We could actually apply best practice and think what was required. We could bring in the right people at that time, and they had clean technology which was state of the art. But I remember, just when you oversee something in a rush, even that technology could fail you badly, despite you have all the practices and the good people on board. I'm not gonna give the details away there right now, because that would not be nice. But
yeah,
um,
well, it is what it is, eh? But it's a lesson
yeah,
learned, and as
and
you quite rightly said that, yeah, the only people who don't make mistakes are people who's not doing anything. It's
exactly.
what
I
we
mean,
do with the mistakes that we make that matters. Yeah.
but I think it's also I recently had it with somebody who made a mistake, and as part of you're getting a call, can you help that? And you have a junior who is very embarrassed that they make a mistake, and they think it's actually like a career limiting move as such. And then I had as a consultant, you actually have to take that person by the hand and actually make sure that they can learn from that mistake. And I know one thing: that person becomes very valuable to the organization because they will
Mm.
never make that mistake again.
Yeah.
And
No,
that's the whole
exactly.
thing. And they will point it out to their colleagues also. I made that mistake, and it's the culture you create with that is actually also that you can move forward. If you have a blame or finger pointing culture, I mean, and I've not never really experienced that, most probably due to my own behavior, that I moved on or something like that. And I think people should move on out of those poisonous organizations. But I mean,
Yeah.
the fact is, like, if you have a good organization who has the right people and the right culture of actually communicating and learning from their mistakes, they can go a long way. They can actually go further than anything else. You could consider that a competitive edge.
Yeah,
Because I mean,
it's
yeah,
this. High trust environments will always perform better than low trust environments.
yeah, yeah,
Because the
and
problem with a
also
low
like,
trust environment is that people are afraid to do anything.
yes,
Because there's this assumption that if you don't do anything, you can't do anything wrong, which is the wrongest thing that you can do, by the way.
yes, I, and also knowing that you're not alone, that you got
Mm,
backup in that way, that you're not alone. I
yeah.
mean, I remember clearly that when I started my job as IT operation manager long time ago, and I came to South Africa, I had to take over from a hands-on IT manager, and I had something like, what is hands-on? That's before I met you even. I mean, what's hands-on? I mean, I have no problem of actually, I have a technical background and I find it fun and everything to still be engaged in that, but I rely on specialists these days to do that. But I mean, I saw then an old man coming down the stairs and had something like, "Ooh, he's carrying a printer. That must be somebody who's going to manage, who's going to report into me," as when I was the manager. And but that was the IT manager. He didn't trust his people to do things in a way. And
Yeah.
I remember clearly I had a very short time to take over from him. And then I had also like the moment he was gone, I said to the guys also, come with me, and we're gonna do this together. Finally, in the end, I went with them, and then one day they went on
I
their
don't know
own
what
and they said, but can I do this? I
happened
said,
there.
I'm only a call away. You follow what I mean? So, and that's the whole thing of how you should work together in a way, and share information on how you do things. So, yeah, I know you spoke with a lot of people already about best practices, and it is as good as the last template as such. Um, so, but together you can determine what is good for an organization and what should be done for an organization. And it's from top to bottom, from left to right. Everyone needs to be involved in that area. They know stuff.
Seems
And
like
if
I've
you
got a
just,
little bit of a network issue.
okay, do the people still hear me,
Um,
Johan? I can keep talking in the meantime if that's better. Johan? So people, I don't know when he's coming back, but we were going to talk about a couple of things like data privacy and business obligation, and of course that's what.
Juergen?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so
Hello.
I think I've solved the problem. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Are we start? Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, there was just, I think, conflicting networks on this side, and yeah, the routers tried to decide which
So
one should
speak
he
to.
listen to instead of the one that I said, that one. Don't be smarter than I am.
Yeah, there's some
Man. Okay.
prophecy coming through that the technology actually decides for you which direction you go.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, Juergen, talking about trust, today the sort of exploring topic is this issue of privacy.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's very close to. I suppose you should not expose information about yourself to somebody who you don't trust. And yet, if we actually look at our behavior as consumers of IT services, I think so few of us actually think twice about saying yes, accept all cookies.
Yeah. It's indeed, it's indeed true. I mean, the people wanna, and I'm not speaking for anyone as such. I must also say, I share my personal view in this session. It's not related to any kind of organization or any other people. I try to give examples as much of that they are independent on that. The people who I refer to will know most probably that I mean them, but I will not name them. But also me, myself, if you want something quickly, you have a tendency of actually cookies, they will be fine, and you click and you haven't read it. I mean, and it's just to get your cherry in a way, what's on the cake there, and actually get what you want. And that's a little bit of a problem in these days. On the one hand, if we talk about data privacy and data protection as such, and data in general, as an IT guy, we should have, in any case, the ethics of building our systems in the correct way. And it has nothing to do with law or something like that. We should actually take that accountability within the systems and making sure that our systems are properly and are also user friendly. That they can be operated. We know also that these user unfriendly systems will never be used. So that's why also that cookie is actually a request, that banner that pops up and accept all cookies, or you want to accept all necessary cookies. Now, okay, what could be the difference between all cookies
What is
and all necessary
necessary?
cookies? That's
It's
and then, but you should look. I mean, there often are some tracking cookies or something like that, but they get some additional information, and often they can do some additional things with that. And before you know, you're getting bombed with new commercial stuff. So yeah, it's like really like we tend to give a lot away in actually moving forward, but that banner is not user friendly actually in a way. But it should be, it must be there in place. But we share also a lot of information easily. I mean, our names on paper, because we both come from a technology area, and we tend to think IT, but still today people share a lot of information also on paper, just like, fill in quickly something, or when you walk into a building today, you still have these security guards at the front who actually want your number plate and want your name with it. And actually what they do with it, it's all personal data, so it should be protected, but it's lying in his at the reception there, it's lying around, freely available, which is actually not really good housekeeping as such. And also as well as I that I know a time that we signed this as Mickey Mouse and Goofy at the government department, and nobody asked anything what kind of was sitting on there. So the fact is, what they want to do, what's the value of that data? I mean, I have something like, don't gather anything that is useful. I mean, must be user friendly in a way, but also with a purpose. So if you don't have a purpose for it, then I always hope that if I sign into a building, for example, that if there's an emergency like a fire, that at least they know I'm somewhere still in that building, and that they come and fetch me. That should be the purpose for safety, or something like that. But if that piece of paper is already up in flames, how are they going to find me?
Exactly. I mean, but here, just a quick question before we take the conversation forward. What is private data?
We got a couple of concepts here. You must understand, we IT people, we're sitting with a lot of data, and a lot of data is one thing. And that means I tend to say, like in our systems, and I keep it quickly to the systems, we talk about business data. And that business data can be anything from orders, invoices, or something like that. And then in that whole set of data, you can actually say there is also, there are people mentioned, there's information about those people. And that's what we call personal identifiable information. And you will like it. We call it PI, but PI is something else. I mean, that's a mathematical term. But in any case, we call that personal identifiable information. And that's what is related to your person. And that data, of course, needs to be protected in a more, I would not say in a different way than business data, because the business data can also be very valuable to competition. But all that data need to be protected and must be collected with a purpose. You shouldn't have that information if you're not intending to use it to service, for example, that person. Like for example, if you wanna, I want to register for this event, what kind of information do you need? That you need most probably my name and my email address, and that could be sufficient. I mean, you don't shouldn't collect that information like my phone number and my if I'm male or female. That actually doesn't matter if I'm male or female. If I have glasses or no glasses or something like that. And that's what we sometimes tend to do. There was a time that we could collect information very easily, and then you get an overload on data, and that's a legacy we got, and we need to clean that up. And we actually, due to the fact that we had that data, we suddenly had that data sitting in our databases, and suddenly we could think about, I got that for the event, but now I can send them an email for the next event or for something else which I want to sell them. But that's not the reason why you got that in the first place. You follow what I mean? And that data.
So there's this principle of we volunteering data, but that volunteering data is not a blanket volunteering.
No, of course not.
It is for a very specific purpose.
Or it could be a broad purpose, because you can, of course, give it for more than one reason. You see that often that, yes, I want to come to the event, and ticket, I want to be updated for a next event, because these events from Johan are interesting. So I want to be kept informed. But that's what we call, you need to give consent in that way. The person itself needs to know where his data is going to be used for, and not that the next day somebody else is going to phone it, or his data is sold in some database marketing company, and suddenly he gets calls from somebody about, we can sell you a new energy contract or something like that. You follow what I mean? So in that way, there is data that needs to be protected. And of course, the companies who have that data, they should actually know exactly what the purpose is and what kind of data they keep for a person within that whole set of data they have for running their business, including the relationship to the business data as such. So that's what data privacy is. And the fact is, like, somewhere in Europe, then 2018, they made a great law, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, so which governed that. And then people said, oh, we need to do a lot of work, but that law was already published in 2016, so you had 2 years to run up to 2018 when it came into play. So yeah, and then people had this whole thing about, and that's what I wanted to come back to. I mean, you can run all kinds of projects, which are, for example, making sure that you know which data you have, that you make your people aware about the new laws, that you have a data protection officer, that you have the rights of those data subjects of citizens are protected, that there are special rights for children. That will be careful. Children are these days better protected, but we should have done that in the first cases. So it's all logical. It's almost like common sense. But this common sense, which we're supposed to do before 2018, was suddenly made law. It's like almost like we should have done that as part of all those best practices, good data governance, and all good enterprise architecture. But right now, it suddenly was law, and law is like black and white in that way. So where was I going to go with this? So suddenly they need to comply, governance, risk, and compliance. They need to comply to this law. And then suddenly they have like, oops, what kind of data do we have? We got all these wonderful, beautiful systems, but I don't know really what kind of data we all have and where it all sits, So now they had to start digging, or actually what we call functional analysis or something like that, but they had to actually re-engineer where all that data is sitting and what they actually contain or what they had. And sometimes they had to clean up really, because they had a lot of stuff sitting there for no purpose. No, they actually had no right for it, and I say rather no purpose, because that's the goal, but no purpose means no rights, the whole thing. So they had to clean that up. And actually, from day one, that bothered me. That we could not, when you say like, as an IT person, can you tell me what kind of data you have? I had something like, well, how again? And then I come back to that story from the GDPR, from the province there. Is actually, how can you as an IT people not know what kind of data you have? I mean, we have all kinds of best practices which actually guide us on good system development, on good functional analysis, with good project management, with great architecture. And actually, suddenly I get a serious question with regards to compliance, and I can't find that stuff anymore, which means, and that's what I have is also, I would have loved to see. I mean, I've seen companies, because it's, of course, I mean, I'm generalizing now, and of course there are people who can do it properly. I mean, that you actually can go to your data model and actually have you can just run over it and mark it, just like, okay, this is business information, and this is personal identifiable information, so that you can classify it. And if you know your databases, and you know in which systems this is used. And I'm making it very simple right now, but I mean, that often didn't happen. I mean, a system goes live, and before you know, it gets designed nicely, and we have a great data model with good system documentation and good analysis and architectural documents. But once that system goes live, and that's what I say is like with the typical projects like we had both on there, the moment that you hand it over to operation, we still need to maintain those practices and make sure that is kept up to date, because for governance, risk and compliance, we need to make sure that sits still within the frameworks or within the boundaries that we know. And often the people who need to look after don't get the time for it, or they're not trained for it, so they cannot do it. I mean, you cannot participate if you don't have the knowledge. That's the whole thing. Yeah.
But I mean, one of the things that concerns me is that I look at dev shops in organizations.
Yep.
And then I look at the things that they're doing, and while they're doing it, I say to myself, but you've got that information. And in many organizations, even really big organizations, there isn't a proper data architecture or information model or a data model.
Exactly.
So you don't know what you don't know, but that doesn't excuse you from the requirements of the law.
Suddenly, it's in a government's model based on best practice, you have some leeway. You can still determine what you want to do and how good you want to be in that way. But suddenly, it's a law. I mean, I need to know this, and suddenly the people have rights. I cannot hide anymore, in a way. And that's the whole thing about the governance and the transparency. When it's required, you need to be transparent at a time that not suits you, but suits the data subject as such, And then I have also like, we need to know the business and the business landscape really clearly in a way to actually start off with this project. And we need to maintain that knowledge so that what you do with all your data, and then of course that what the purpose is, because most IT people, if I go to a developer, he's very enthusiastic about what he's building and how beautiful it is and how performant it is, and that it's going to have a purpose, and that it's going to be, of course, great value because he's part of that. But I have something like, but finally in the end, it needs to fit in that business and in that landscape. And each landscape for each business is, of course, different, depending on what you do. I mean, and you need to apply that and take that with. And then, like you said, it's like those data models. I mean, somewhere they exist. This often based on business rules. Business rules are also part of that. What do you do with that? And then that you can move with that forward within these boundaries and protect that data accordingly.
Let's make it a little bit more practical. Recently, you were appointed in the role for a large corporate environment to be the data privacy owner, or the owner of that. What is this?
I'm the data protection officer.
Okay, so what is the steps that somebody in a organization need to take? Think about it. Yeah, from day one, you walk into the organization. So, what are the steps that the board needs to ensure that somebody that is the data protection officer or data privacy officer need to take to show due diligence in terms of compliance?
Look, there are. I mean, it's not related to the position I have because I mean, depending on the which kind of organization you have, it could become very complex or it can become really straightforward. I mean, there's a significant difference between a logistics company with a very linear process or a company like one of the big five who has multiple processes in different ways. So you can see that the complexity could be very different. But coming back to for one or the other, what you should know is, like I said, is like you should know what the processing activities are of that company.
Okay, so that gets back to this issue of know the
Yeah,
business of the
yeah.
business. Yeah.
You need to know the business of the business as such. I mean, and that needs to be embedded in a register. You need to know what and the processing activity. You can link that back to a functionality like BPMN, business process management. You could use that as a framework to actually say, okay, if I can identify the business processes, I can identify the business process activities. But the moment you start with that, you can also say, okay, that's what the business is really doing. I mean, and also that is sometimes a painful exercise to let people tell, what do you do on a daily basis? I mean, that they don't know. I mean,
As little as possible.
yeah, sometimes when you ask somebody like that, what do you do a day? They go home and they need to go in therapy because now you pointed out something that. But I don't do it on purpose. I do that with my full interest in helping them forward. When I say, what do you do here? I mean, not like what do you do here? So if you know what these process activities are, then you know also that which systems are part of that, what kind of data is sitting in this system. And it could well be that then also if there's personal identifiable information in that, and if there's special categories such as health information sitting in there, because that's a little bit more sensitive, that's like we need to make sure that it's properly protected. Based on that, you can, of course, then fall back on information security to make sure that these systems are properly protected. For example, according to a framework like ISO 27000, so that, data at rest is encrypted, data in transit is encrypted, just to give you something, and that the credentials of accessing the systems are properly managed. So that's what they call Article 32, is that you take the organizational and technical measures to safeguard your data as such. But that's actually falling back on information security, according to my opinion. I mean, data protection and data privacy have are really attached to information security because information security is often more technical in that way than data protection. Of course, you need to also know which laws are applied, but that's something else. And then you have actually often you must make sure that these data, you got that correctly in a way, that you have obtained a consent, or you got it with as part of a legitimate interest as such, that you're not holding any data without the person's approval, that he knows that, that's the main thing.
When you use the word correct, you mean it in two ways. So first of all, that there is consent.
Yeah.
And secondly, that it is the right data.
Yeah. You have an obligation to keep that data accurate, eh? Not to manipulate it for whatever purpose. So because the data subject has a number of rights. I mean, he has the right to correct it, for example. He has the right to look in it. He has the right to, if he look, and that's of course a difficult one, the right to be forgotten, that he can request you to delete that. But of course, when it's a a tax transaction, you cannot just delete that because there are other laws also where you need to have a data retention for that. For that data, you need to also determine then the retention period. So that should be also, you could determine that also at the beginning of the application lifecycle. You follow what I mean? If you know your process, you know how long you should keep data. For example, with your bookkeeping, I don't know how long it's with you right now.
7 years.
7 years. A lot of organizations have 7 years. So actually, after 7 years, you shouldn't have that information anymore because it becomes a liability to you. Then, and then as a DPO, you should also, be aware. Look, it's all nicely sitting there. It's nicely in the hands of the IT people who are very capable. They're looking after all the security boundaries of all the boundaries of access are nicely secured according to the latest and greatest. You know what I mean? So you can sleep peacefully. Yeah. But you still should have then a couple of processes that actually, like I said, is like if people want to access their rights, that you have a front end process that actually that they can come to you and that you can see if you can help them with that. That's the data subject requests they can do. There's their rights. And on the other hand, you have also if something goes wrong, you read a lot in the newspaper, and then of course your typical counterpart would be a chief information security officer. That if there's a security incident, a security incident should not always be a data breach, but a security incident could be also a data breach. And then you of course have a role as a DPO to make sure that you mitigate that, but also communicate to those data subjects that there is something happening with their data and that you are in full control, because that's what you want to do. And that's what I tend to call those two processes front-end process, because they really sitting in operational. We in ITIL we had also front-end processes like the service desk and the incident management is the typical thing you cannot run away from it when it happens. But you need to think about those processes that you know how to escalate and as a DPO, you rather do some trial, some typical simulations to make sure that all the people, because it shouldn't happen every day. Within ITIL, incidents and requests are coming every day. You know that. So you have tools for that. But on the other hand, with the DPO, you don't have a data breach every day. I hope not, because I mean, then there's something wrong in a way. And then the last but not least is, of course, I mean, there are other things also like privacy by design that you should do with the architects when new solutions getting onboarded and everything. But the main thing is also, and that's the nice thing, is also that you need to make people aware of this, that what their rights are, but also not only as a data subject, but also as a what we rather call a data handler. They are interacting with data, and before you know, the worst data is that data that sits with people in a spreadsheet or in an email.
Or
Because
in the inbox.
you can't grab it. I mean, if it's sitting in a nice system like Salesforce or ServiceNow or SAP, then I can fall back on the architecture and the databases and also the access right. Well, with that silly spreadsheet, it doesn't matter if it's a Google Sheets or a Microsoft Excel. Before you know, they're gathering information and it's out of your view, and that's sometimes dangerous. And you need to make them aware that they shouldn't keep it there. So and rather also give them all the tools. And that's of course where IT comes into play again. As a counterpart, as a DPO, you're not the IT person, but of course when you see problems, often we can sort it out with IT solutions or mostly with awareness. I mean, helping them to become aware of this whole thing. I mean, and I said it earlier on, I mean, people without knowledge cannot participate in your process. You need to make sure that they got knowledge, and that's the awareness. And you can go, of course, in depth. I mean, they don't have to be certified experts in data privacy or something like that. But a general course like or a couple of hours awareness would be great for them. I mean, that I'm a great fan of actually having an education track next to an implementation track. so that it
Yeah.
happens continuously. That's we always did that when we did projects with CSMG and Quintica at that time. Always start off or try to get a track of education and training with it.
That's why we had an education business, because we know we could feed
Yeah.
it ourselves.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I remember clearly, and the fact is also, I remember clearly a project where, and it was good, but I mean, it was also a lot. There was a large corporation in also where we had our office at that time. They made it compulsory for each and every person to follow ITIL Foundation at that time, and had something like, well, that's a lot of people. There are 3,000 people working with you. Yeah, they made bluntly a statement. Everyone has to go through that. And that was the time before e-learning and everything, because that didn't happen. They all were trained and was made part of their KPIs, the personal KPIs. They had to write the exam. But the great thing is they all started to talk the same language in the way. They understood the essentials. And it's because we're talking about foundation by accident, and I thought about today, and I used the word essential this afternoon also. The ITIL Foundation was called first ITIL Essentials, and essential is a better word because that's the least you need. So and foundation is also the whole thing, but I mean, and I think it's the same thing counts for when you in data protection. You need to make sure, and not only in data protection, but in anything, even if you have project managers or people who need to participate in projects, they need to understand how agile works, what is expected from. Doesn't make them an agile project manager, but I mean the same thing is like they need to be trained. Same thing in data privacy. I mean, train them so they are aware what data classifications would be. I mean, of course, you can bring your own policies where it like your data classifications which you have, and actually say also if something goes wrong, that's the person you need to call, and if you want new technology, that's where you need to be. You can build that, of course, the way how you want that, but I mean, so awareness, a big thing in a way, and I'm talking about, and you can go further than that. And the other thing that you need to make sure is that it's actually practice what you preach, just making sure that your contracts are there, that it's not only that you demand it from your suppliers, but also that you do it yourself, and it's throughout. And it's a difficult job for some companies, large corporations, or governments. It could become complex, but there's no excuse. That's a little bit the thing. I mean, and I'm gonna mention something, because I mean, a couple of years ago, when we all had to be compliant with the law in 2018, the Dutch receiver of revenue said we will be compliant by 2023. I have something like, that's not an excuse. You're a government organization. It doesn't matter if you're a commercial organization or whatnot, but you have an obligation. You ethically obligated to actually have your ducks in a row.
And I mean, it's European law. So
European law, but it's not only European law. I mean, you see everywhere around the world, you see this concept of the GDPR. In California, but also in Brazil and South America, but in China also, you see the citizens, data subjects, the rights are protected in a way, and luckily it's fairly similar in the way how it is approached. But there should be, to actually get there. I mean, that's the whole thing. You would say like you should fall back on good practices that we had already. We should have had already in maintaining data.
In fact, if you now all of a sudden have to do all of these things from scratch, it would also help other parts of the business, because all of a sudden you actually will have a data architecture.
Look, I mean, you can do this, of course, in isolation and say, I'm the DPO, I'm going to get this. And if it's a small company that, there are companies who have no developers, and they they just have all packaged information, like packaged information. I mean, they're nothing more than using software packages, and they procure the license, and it's hosted in a cloud. So it becomes pretty much easy for them. And a supplier should also be able to answer you, where is the data sitting? You refer to a data model. I've asked her, like, well, once to using that kind of software. Yeah, I don't know what the data is in there. I don't know what the data model is. I said, like, just ask the supplier.
Yeah, but it's actually quite, I think, quite complex, because many of these SaaS and cloud providers, actually, to get anything out of them,
Yeah,
is very difficult.
this is costing time and money to do it the right way. And time and money to do it the right way is not always the most profitable way. And that's where, of course, friction comes. So I have something like, also, I'm talking also from a utopia point of view, where we have a tendency of knowing both sides of the best practices, and knowing the lower maturity and the higher maturity, and we both know the highest maturity. Good luck if you can reach that. I want to see the first one who achieved that. And is flawless for years. You know what I mean? Because often they tip it, and then they're happy, and then they fall back and they lift again. So it's always a wave that is actually coming by, because the business is moving forward. So you get always new challenges in that way. And I think it's the same thing with this kind of thing. It's like, you need to have a certain risk appetite and priority in making sure you get a feel of being in control, because that's the whole thing. You need to have, and here we're coming back on what Deming said, is continuous improvement. I mean, you cannot get this perfectly in line. I mean, it's a moving target. But with that awareness and participation and continuous improvement, and setting priorities based most probably on risk in this case, and not just on appetite, but then you can move forward and actually do a good thing. And actually, if you would have a flaw, or a failure, or a data breach, at least you would be able to see, but I took my responsibility. I can help be accountable, but I can prove that I took my responsibility, that I was not negligent.
You showed
That's a big
due
thing.
diligence.
Yeah, but if
So
you actually
talking about Deming, just a by the by, one of his, I think it was Deming. I don't think it was Juergen, but I think it was Deming who said that. Said, "In God I trust; all others must bring evidence."
Exactly, and that's where that evidence comes in. I mean, you can do continuous improvement, but that evidence shows you that you are aware of what's happening, and that you have a plan for it. And I mean, if I see something tomorrow that is not working, I cannot just fix it overnight. If I can do that, I'll call you. I mean, then we have a great business. I mean, if I can fix things like that on the fly, then I'm a magician, So, but the fact is that if you identify it and you actually consciously drive it forward in that way, I think you took your responsibility. And that's not then if something goes wrong with that, then it's just like a little bit of bad luck, which, yeah, bad luck is still like
Well,
shit.
there's an interesting concept, luck. So you've got some interesting views on luck.
Yeah, the harder you practice, the luckier you get.
Yeah.
And that's it.
So I think we were wondering about that, but I think you're right. It was Gary Player that said that. Yeah.
It's Gary Player, who, of course, is a great golf player, and still at his age. And he said, like, the harder you practice, the luckier you get. And of course, it has if you know the game of golf, it's like you don't walk on the golf course and you start playing golf. You need to practice a lot to get that little stupid ball in the hole. So
yeah, I don't have the patience, quite honestly.
I do. to stay sane.
But you know that the Afrikaans expression "moeren soek," yeah.
Yeah, moer en soep, yeah.
Sorry,
But
only Afrikaans and Dutch people will understand what that means.
yeah, but there's the same thing. Like when you talk about these things, I mean, it's not only Gary Player, but there's another player who's quite famous, is Tiger Woods. And then people think like, how many times do you think Tiger Woods can hit it from 110 yards directly on the green? And it's 1 out of 5 of his shots are still going wrong.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's also like, I mean, and he practiced a lot. I mean, and the whole thing is, if you're not an expert, you must expect that you need to work hard on that. I mean, and because a lot of things will be unclear, you need to be patient, despite that the business is not always patient for you. But I mean, you need to be patient to make sure that you practice, you gain knowledge, you gain experience, and that's the whole thing. I mean, the moment you've been washed through many waters, I mean, then suddenly when something comes your way, you automatically pick it up, and it's you're not stressed or something like that, and you can keep a sense of humor in that way. I mean, and that's what I have. The people should be worried when I stop laughing.
Because then they know you're deep in it.
Then we deep shit, yeah. So then if I don't know it anymore, then because I mean I think also if you with a team and you need to tackle something, um, humor keeps sparking your mind in a way, and actually keep you motivated to push on in that way. I mean that's what I always experience. So yeah, I mean.
Yeah.
It's not that you need
So,
to fall laughing over the floor like, oh, we had a data breach. What a fun. Look at these. I was going to use words which I shouldn't use in this video. I mean, but look at these poor people. They lost all their data. I mean, that's not what you want to say. I mean, no, you can say like, okay, you can make jokes on like, now, Johan, here we go. Let's order the pizza and the Coke like we always do, because this is going to be a full night.
all-nighter, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So yeah.
So, I mean, a little bit earlier, we mentioned this issue of the challenge that we sometimes have with suppliers who we rely on to be able to show compliance.
Yeah.
But there's this principle in information security that says that understand the boundary of trust. And what I always say to people, assume that your supplier won't do their job. And if they don't, what do you do then on your side of the boundary of trust? Yeah.
Yeah. And the least what you should have done is actually thought about it, what you're going to do.
Yeah.
You can make a conscious decision not to do anything about it, which means then the risk is actually addressed. But often we say it's like, what is your exit
Addressed or
strategy?
considered?
Yeah, at least consider an exit strategy. I mean, because I
Yeah.
mean, I know also that I got for this for a while ago was also like this question: what do we do when this supplier falls over? And then actually you must sometimes face that at that particular moment when you make the analysis, that you have no options, that you are stuck between a rock and a hard place, and then it means like but the question comes, maybe at that particular moment you don't have the so-called exit strategy, but you can start working on that and do that analysis again in 3 months time, and maybe it changes in the land. And that's what I meant earlier on with understand your business landscape and your IT landscape in which you move, that actually you know where your risks are in that way. I mean, first of all, the dependency could be managed. The first thing you need to do, of course, I mean, if your supplier is not up to scratch, I mean, you really need to address that in the relationship before they go out of business. And then you really, and then of course you can put a lot of things in place with that current supplier to actually mitigate risk so that you have information from it, so that you could continue to, like for example, escrow agreements or something like that. That's like, it's a little bit the supplier and continuously agreements like we have also in ITIL in a way, but that's what you should have done also. Yeah, and then going forward is like, of course, like you must always open your options. But the fact is, again, they're not falling back on there, but we should manage the life cycle of applications. And that's what I've seen also, is that sometimes the life cycle of an application, the most of the time that we end up with this so-called exit strategy and having no options, is when the life cycle of an application is not managed and we're actually sitting stuck. We cannot go anywhere with our data, or we cannot go with our application, which means that you really, it's an opportunity, by the way, to redevelop your whole system to make sure that you can move over from one to a clean slate and leave that legacy behind. I mean, let's be honest, there were a lot of organizations depending on Microsoft's SQL 2000 with the, I think it was storing forward procedures and had whole applications running on that. And suddenly Microsoft said, we're not supporting that anymore. So they were on a dead track. So, yeah. Which means,
so, I mean, the job of a data privacy officer is actually never done, and it's sort of then a moving target.
Yeah, it depends.
So you have to be sort of a wizard.
Thanks for the compliment. You have to be. I think you, as a data protection officer, it's. I can look back on a lot of experience. Luckily, you should never underestimate it. There's a lot of technical information coming past because a lot of data you need to govern is sitting in IT systems. So you need to really have a little bit, not a little bit, a good sense of how these IT people speak, and that you are aware of that you understand what they do. You don't have to be a specialist, but if you have a little bit of that, you can get over that boundary and actually have a conversation with them. On the other hand, you as a data protection officer, you have an independent role. So you're actually not belonging anywhere in a way. So you're not belonging with IT, but you're also not belonging with the legal department. You're not belonging with procurement or HR, but you need to have actually a good communication skills and a collaborative way of working. I think that would be, besides your knowledge about law and IT and data privacy, I think that will be a requirement. If you are an introvert person, you're going to be failing. I mean, you really need to be outgoing and going talk to people and ask them, what do you do? And actually also be reachable, accessible, that if they have a question, that you are taking them serious and actually help them with their question, advise them on how to go forward. At that particular moment, you shouldn't say like, that's a stupid question or something like that, because then of course you block them off. You really need to take them serious so that you're accessible, and then your whole radar, which you got on what's happening in a business, start to grow. I mean, that would be and you need to be aware that you need to rely on that they doing the right thing. Trust, again, within the organization should be there. We are part of one and the same organization. We are contributing to the same goal as such, and therefore it's not them and me. I'm not sitting in an ivory tower as a data protection officer. No, we all one, depending on what kind of grade you have or something like that. That's supposed to be.
But I mean,
but that's my philosophy in a way. In any case, that. But you need to be able to shape that.
Yeah, but your role is to help people identify what needs to be improved, but you cannot be involved in the improvement, because then I don't know, if you define your own solutions that you need to validate and check, isn't that a conflict of interest?
I'm not implementing them. I mean, yes, I am independent, but it doesn't mean that I'm not part of the organization. So, which means
Mm.
if I know, if somebody comes and asks me how do I do that, I'm not gonna lead him by questions and something like to his answer, and that he gives
Okay.
the answer himself. Then I also say I've seen that before. Why wouldn't I? Or these are your options. What would fit in
Okay.
there? Why wouldn't I be part of that discussion in the solution? But it's
Mm.
still his solution. It may never become my solution, in a way.
Yeah.
He's the owner of the data. I'm not the owner of the data. He stays responsible and accountable for the data. I'm only helping him to making sure that he fits within the government framework,
Okay.
governance framework, not government framework, governance framework. So, and in that way, I mean, why can't I help him in that way? I mean, and in some way, I would have also, yeah, I can guide them in the right direction. Why not?
Yeah. Okay. Okay, but you still need to validate that the actions taken meets the
Of
criteria.
of course. Then the whole thing, what you're going to see in the future is that there's a uh, you're going to see that information security and data protection are going to be sitting shoulder to shoulder and actually being based on that. A while ago you had somebody talking about ISO 27000.
Yeah.
You will see that the ISO 27701 will caught on. I mean, that's not only for GDPR, but that's data protection in general, and you can use that framework to embed it into your management system of information security. It's logical that it happens, but you still need to do a lot of tailoring in a way of making sure that it fits for you, for GDPR or for Europe or for Canada or for California. But you will see there's a move on that, on actually having those frameworks, which means you're not certifying against the law, but at least your practices will be then certified like you have with information security. Yeah.
Yeah. So last question, because we closing in on the hour.
We always can
Um,
keep on talking and we can continue another time if
yeah, but then
necessary.
nobody is going to listen though. We can rather talk again. Um,
No,
any
that's what I
law
mean.
or
Another time, eh?
regulation, yeah, any law or regulation is as good as it's enforcing. So,
Yeah.
do you in Europe see that people are actually, that there's consequences for people who don't take these things seriously? Because
Yes,
quite
and I
honestly,
have,
I mean, we don't see
yes,
a lot of evidence of that. Yeah.
I see it. Um, there are organizations that get investigated or for keeping or not responding, and they getting complaints, and then the authorities, what we call the data protection authorities, and each country in Europe has its own authority. Germany is a little bit different because you got the federal model there. There's 21 data protection authorities, so it's like hallelujah. Um, so it's not one Europe. It's each and every country again on a European law with its own authority, with sometimes deviations locally again. But these authorities, they can investigate you and they can actually do an audit on you, and actually, if there's something a reason for it, they could even fine you if you have a leakage, data breach, for example. You're obviously obligated to report that to the authorities within 72 hours. If you haven't done that, then of course they could fine you for that if it's really serious. And it happens that some organizations get I think it was a school who got a fine of 400,000 euros fine. And
So for a school.
so I have no problem that they check with that. That they actually enforce the law and they look after it. The only thing I have a problem with, and it's of course this is not for the Facebooks and the Googles, it is something else, but for the smaller organizations, I mean, there was also a small fine like 12,000 euros for a small orthodontic practice. I mean, I have something like
Okay.
those fines. I find actually not a good measure. I would rather say because actually the reason why I find it not a good measure is they taking liquidity out of the organization, and if you take money out of the organization, it doesn't help to make them better. So I would rather say, instead of like you finding them, like, for example, 100,000 euros, and taking the 100,000 euros out of the organization, I would rather say you need to start a program to improve your information security and your data protection, and you will at least spend 100,000 euros on it. So that at least
So
that
show me
money.
the investment, we're going to audit it.
Yeah. So because
that's a good idea. Like it.
if the money goes to the authority, I have something like, okay, there will be most probably a couple of auditors again paid from that money to have more audits and everything. And I would rather see that they actually force organization to upkeep their systems and their protection, and actually rather say you under supervision you will spend so much money on that, and thereafter we at least know that the maturity level and that your leaks are properly addressed. I find it a more positive way of handling it. If some organizations get a hefty fine from an authority, they would go bankrupt.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, and maybe something for the next conversation.
Yes. Yes.
So, Juergen Mueller, thank you very much. Thanks, my friend. I really appreciate it. Always enjoy talking to you. Can't wait to have a beer with you in the Netherlands.
Yes, we will.
And thank you for making time available for us.
Cool. Thank you. And all the people who are listening. Yeah.